Hello, my friend, and welcome back to another popsicle stick pull. If you're wondering what that is, it's where I take a topic that is a random word on a popsicle stick and talk about it as it relates to body image, mindset, or creativity. So let's see what today's topic is going to have to be. Oh, this is a long one. Coping with different, I think it says news. Coping with different news. Anywho, coping. We'll just sum it up to coping. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about coping. Coping skills are one of those things that unless we were in therapy from the time that we were little, we never really learned how to cope with heartache, disappointment, frustration, or things like that. And a lot of us, especially those of us that grew up in the 80s, learned to fend for ourselves a little bit and figure out different coping mechanisms that may not be the best in order to get us through feeling certain emotions. Now, for me, when I was growing up as the middle child, I was basically always told that I was easy. I was easy being born. I was easygoing. I was always adaptable. And my mom used to say things like, "Oh, I never had to worry about you," which sounds great, right? But I prided myself on this, that I was, I didn't ever want to be an inconvenience, because then my mother would not think that I was an easy child, right? And I could see my sister is a more visceral, reactionary person, so she would get in trouble a lot more, and so I just knew I didn't want to be like that, and instead, I never learned how to cope with anger, with disappointment, and with any feelings that I consider to be hard or bad. And because of that, it's actually one of the things that led me into emotional eating and using food as a way to cope. I always say you can't scream or shout or yell if your mouth is full of food. And that was one of the reasons why I turned to food as my coping mechanism. As I grew up, one of the other coping mechanisms, and I don't think I'm alone in this, that I learned, because it also coincides with scarcity mindset and this belief that I am not deserving of abundance or things like that, is I learned how to cope with difficult feelings by shopping or spending money. And that just reaffirms an old story of my own. And clearly nowadays that's less of a problem than it used to be, but it still shows up. Like I tell people when it comes to things like body image, and they come in for a photo shoot thinking like one photo shoot's going to change their body image. You've had 25 years plus to think one way about yourself. It is not going to be done in one day. However, it can start the process of working through that. And so while I'm less likely to cope with my feelings, my harder feelings like anger, frustration, disappointment, and so on, with the old ways of coping, overeating and overspending, I still experience the feelings and I get uncomfortable feeling them. This is what I call that squidgy feeling. When I finish a big project and then I feel empty because I have nothing to produce and I've tied my value to productivity, that's a squidgy feeling that I want to cope with. And if I don't look at how I'm currently coping with it, it's hard to change it to cope with it in a different way. So the first step with coping with anything is to literally just bring awareness to it. And every time you listen to one of these talks, that is always going to be my first step. It's just, what are you doing? Like being aware of, what am I doing? How am I doing it? And not judging it for when it happens. So the first thing I had to start looking at is saying like, oh, I recognize I felt this emotion and this was the behavior that followed. I don't change it. I allow myself to go through the process, whereas previously, because we all love to create our own suffering, is that I would, for example, feel empty. I would overconsume, whether it's through shopping or eating, and then I would feel shame about it, which would then, guess what? Make me feel a bad feeling, which means I would want to deal with the feeling. And the way that I dealt with the feeling was more overconsumption. And so it was just like this vicious cycle of coping to get me to this point. Now, I want to preface this with, don't ever be ashamed of doing what you had to do to get you to this point. This is very important. It's very easy to look back, and I have done this to myself. I look back and I say, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Like when my dad died, I made a lot of questionable choices. All right. But I was grieving, and I had never learned how to cope with grief because I never really had the experience of it before. Plus, nobody knows how to cope with it really. And you are going through it. You're stumbling through it and just grabbing any lifeline you can find. A lot of those lifelines turned out to be not super great choices for who I wanted to be. But I don't shame myself for it. I was trying to survive, right? And so were you. And so if you find yourself wanting to change the behavior, the first thing we have to change is your belief about it, right? Your belief about either the situation or the feeling that you're trying to deal with. For me, I always told myself that anger, frustration, disappointment, emptiness, sadness, these are inconvenient feelings. This was the story I told myself. I labeled them as bad. And of course, when we label things as bad, our brain's like, I don't want anything to do with that. But if we can label it as information, it's not good, it's just information, then all of a sudden it changes how you're going to interact with that thing. So for me, because it's about coping with emotions and feelings, I had to recognize that anger is equally as valuable as joy. And sadness is equally as valuable as happiness or peace. It's just information to tell me about the context and the space in which I'm currently inhabiting. So when I feel those things, previously I would pay attention to my behavior and I would say, okay, I recognize whenever I finish a big project, my instinct is to default to overconsumption and overspending. And this is the cool thing with metrics. You can track most of those things. You can definitely track your spending if you're looking at your bank accounts, which is its whole other conversation. But if you look at your bank accounts, you will not only see when are you spending the most money, and then you can build context around it. What was happening when I spent that amount of money on that specific thing? Because here's the thing. I wouldn't just spend money on anything. I would spend money on very specific things in order to cope, particularly clothing. That is my kryptonite. And now maybe like film equipment, like photography stuff for film photography. But because anytime I didn't feel valuable in myself, or I felt this sense of emptiness, I felt that I had to fill it up quickly. So I would either use food or I would turn to shopping and buy clothes. It was always clothes. And then all of a sudden I would have this mountain of clothes and it would come in the mail and I'd feel guilty. I'd like hide packages from my husband. I would make up excuses. It was not great. But more importantly, I realized like not just that I didn't want to be buying so much stuff. I actually wanted to save my money. Like I have monetary financial goals that I want to achieve. And if I keep spending money whenever I feel deflated or I don't want to deal with a feeling, I'm not going to be able to achieve those goals. So this next iteration of Terry needs to figure out what is getting in the way of her saving money. And one of those things is how I use money to help me cope. Therefore, what I have had to do is recognize what is the catalyst for me wanting to buy these things in the first place. And again, not changing the behavior because you have to witness it enough times to collect data. And recognizing, okay, when I buy this around this time, when I felt this way, afterwards I felt not super excited about myself. Because when I spend money on things that are in alignment with who I want to be, I don't feel anything. I don't feel shame. I don't feel guilt. I am excited. But I mean, ultimately, I'm like, yes, this was a worthwhile purchase because I've been thinking about it for a while. And I do believe it is in alignment with the life I want to live. So there's no like emotional attachment to the thing, if that makes sense. So anytime I would spend money on things that would have an emotional attachment to it, I realized that I was using spending as a way to cope with emotions that I felt were inconvenient. Once I established that, then I could look at and say, okay, what are the patterns or trends around the specific feelings? Okay, I notice anytime that I feel insecure or less valuable than, people around me, I guess. A comparison, jealousy would be the main feeling there. Whenever I feel jealous, I feel that I have to go buy something to make up for the jealousy. I don't like feeling jealous, so what do? I will buy something which chucks that little dopamine and makes me feel better. I don't want to be that person anymore. Now when I feel that jealousy, when I'm looking at somebody else's work or thinking that, oh my God, I'm not producing enough and everyone else is producing more, what have you, now I'll say, okay, let's explore that a little bit. Why do you think you always have to be producing? I will sit with myself. I will journal. I will tell somebody. That's a good coping mechanism. Tell somebody when you're like, oh, I've been really feeling this way, or I've been thinking this thought and it's making me really squidgy. Those are coping mechanisms too. We can shift it, but we have to recognize when is it happening in the first place. So now if I know I have a big project that I'm going to complete, I now know, okay, I understand that in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to feel very itchy that I'm not producing anything. I need to know how to talk myself through that. And so I come up ahead of time with a contingency plan. In the event that I should feel squidgy about not producing, what can I say to myself to help me get through it, to help me move through it, to help me feel it? I can say, hey, I acknowledge that it feels like we're not producing right now, but the percolation stage is important for you to be able to create the next thing that you want to create. You need this break time. You just did a lot of work and now it's rest time. I need to come up with that ahead of time, because when I'm in it, when you're in a state of feeling feelings, especially ones that can trigger you, you do not have the wherewithal to be able to come up with a contingency plan in that moment. So you want to do it ahead of time. But again, how are you going to be able to do that if you don't recognize the trend, so that way you can prepare for it the next time it's coming? So I hope this makes sense about why it's so important for you to witness, become aware of what's happening at first. So just look at your behavior. Don't judge it. Just say, I notice when this happens, this happens. I notice when I have this thought, I feel this, and then I do this. When I feel this, I think this, and then I do this. So you want to start kind of breaking down and just asking yourself, why? That's it. Literally getting curious about the actions that you have. And some of them, you'll be like, oh, I do this because XYZ. But others, it'll start the process of you recognizing that a lot of your behaviors are default behaviors that maybe you had when you were younger, and maybe you learned from a parent, and maybe you just picked up along the way from a friend or a loved one or something like that, and it may not be helping you be the person you want to be, right? For me, I want to be able to save money. I want to be able to put aside a certain amount for my retirement. I want to be able to change the story that I'm not good with money. I want to prove to myself that money's just money. It's not good or bad. It is just what it is, right? And in order to do that, I have to figure out, where is it going away and why? What am I using money to cope with? What am I using food to help me cope with? And what are some other ways that I can cope with those things? So hopefully this made sense and was beneficial. One of the downsides to doing a popsicle stick pull is it is just off the cuff, and I just blab on about whatever the topic is that I am given, but sometimes that's when the magic comes out. So there you have it. All right, so hopefully that was beneficial. Hopefully you'll take something away. The main thing is become aware, pay attention, what are the circumstances, and then figure out, what am I coping with, how am I coping with it, and how do I want to be coping with it? And then just start making changes, tiny little changes. All right, thanks for sticking with me, friends, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.